Oysters is the conversation today. I haven't lived here for that long, probably 10 years, but I know that there is one thing that this area is very famous for, and that is shellfish. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on the Edible Valley podcast. My name is William Stringer.
I'm Chef Jonathan Frazier, and it's time to get into the oysters and check out our beautiful coastline here.
Let's chuck!
Do you ever wonder where your food comes from? That's what got us started on this adventure.
In each episode, we ask experts to weigh in on the food topics that matter to you, from growers to producers to chefs.
And I challenge John, Darren, and you to learn more about your food and the stories behind it. From our hub on Vancouver Island in the beautiful Comox Valley, join us as we explore our Edible Valley. Hello, how's it going? Whatever you're up to today, hope it's a good one. We are talking, well, it's going to be a great one today. Shellfish, we're thinking Fanny Bay, we're thinking delicious, fresh Vancouver Island exported all over the world.
That's what we're going to get into today. We're talking about, let's get into oysters, and I'm excited. Sorry. I got to calm down a bit.
Shuffling around.
I'm like, we got a few things to get onto. But let's just really dive into oysters today, because I thought, this is the time of year that it's best.
Okay, I was actually going to ask that. So why is it so important for Pacific Northwest cuisine?
Why is it so specific? Well, it's because,
Wait a minute, what was that? Say it again. Why is it so specific? Are you mixing up Pacific and specific?
I think I might be.
Don't worry, you're amongst friends, John. You're among friends. We're not here to judge.
Well, and I'm saying, we have such a pristine area here, and
Yeah.
we'll get into it in the podcast a bit, because I really want to talk about why this region is so good. But it's right now is a perfect season for oysters, and it's because the waters are so cold and so crisp. Maybe not this year because it's a little bit warmer, but I'm just saying we have this. Oysters like to be cold. They like to be able to be in really fresh water, so there's not a lot of algae blooms like that, because there can be a lot of fears that go along with oysters. Many people have gotten sick by eating oysters at the wrong time or not being properly prepared.
Well, I knew, briefly I lived in Kingston, Ontario, and my job, it was the only job I could get at the time, was to clean shellfish. I knew what the weather was like in BC because one of my jobs was to open the Fanny Bay shellfish and clean them, get them all ready. When that would dry up and it would suddenly be from, Maine or somewhere like that instead, I would know that the weather was too warm in BC. And I know that the shellfish supply to this town stops in the middle of the summer when the temperatures are too hot because it doesn't like it.
And that's exactly it. You know what? If you want to get into oysters right now, if you want to go down to the beach and chuck some, make sure you check the tide guides and let's check with the regulations. But this is a great opportunity to get into some oysters, or even just, head to your local grocery store. I went into Fanny Bay Oysters. I have a treat for you later, Will.
Oh my gosh. Can I do full disclosure? I actually came out of 50. I came 20th in an oyster shucking competition in Ottawa. Back in 2015, I could shuck an oyster, boy.
That is good to know. So that we have no fears. Let's get into this, and let's start out with introduction to oysters. And it's why are oysters, and specifically on the West Coast here, so important to us, right? I think there is definitely a cultural heritage, right? Because this is a food source for Indigenous people of the Northwest.
I was going to ask that. Is it a First
years.
Nations? They would be mad not to, wouldn't they? It's the original bounty of the land.
Yes, and it's deeply ingrained into the region's culinary heritage and culinary traditions, right? It plays a central role in feasts, ceremony, and gatherings, right?
Wow.
So this is that's kind of why oysters are so important and have grown up. Economical impact on us, how much money comes out of this area for oysters. And let's get real, Fanny Bay oysters, they're known around the world for their beautiful flavor. You can use oysters in so many different ways, from raw oysters in the half shell, grilled, steam, fried, and you can incorporate them into so many dishes like chowders, stews, and even seafood platters.
All right, so I've got a couple of questions. I think myself included and a lot of other people will go into a supermarket and they'll see all this kind of the crab in the tank, which always makes me feel very sad. And then the oysters and all of that area, the mussels. And they might just think, oh, no, that's specialised cooking. And I kind of think there's a missed opportunity there, but I haven't ever got to actually doing that. I always think with oysters, when you shuck an oyster and open it, you eat the oyster, and that's it. That's what you do with oysters. Are you saying there's more things that people can do?
Oh my God, there's so many different ways. Like, yeah, as I was saying, we can grill them. Just throwing an oyster on a grill, you get that nice hot smoky flavor throughout it.
Nice.
You just wait till they pop, crank them off. Maybe throw a little bit of garlic butter on there.
Yeah.
Or a mignonette or a hot sauce or something like that, and there you go.
So you don't have to have them raw out the shell.
No, raw. And I mean, who doesn't love a nice oyster burger?
No,
I know that's a
true.
big thing for most people. It's just one of those things, like, so yeah, no, like you can bread it and fry it is a great way of doing it. And I love Oyster Rockefeller, Oyster Casino. There's so many great opportunities you can have with that. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, I'm imagining very shortly I'm going to find out for myself because you've got something planned.
Of course. And let's just talk about the Pacific Northwest. It's prized for its flavor. Its characteristics is in its brine, right? It's a very mineral-rich taste with hints of sweetness. And also, like, oysters they're like wines, I think, in some senses. You can think of them because different regions have different flavors, and whether they're a beach oyster or a deep sea oyster or a hung oyster, there's so many different flavors you can get out of this oyster from where it's eating, what it's the waters it's in, the temperature of the water. It's kind of interesting. I think it's just a fun way to do it. And the other thing is like the tourism and hospitality impact of oysters in this area, right? We have so many festivals, tastings. How many restaurants showcase oysters?
Yeah.
It's just a draw for the area.
I mean, the BC Shellfish Festival is absolutely huge. Mm-hmm. In the Philburg Park every single year. It's absolutely a massive one.
And that's not at the Philburg anymore.
Where is it now?
It's at Mount Washington.
Why have they moved it?
They just went to Mount Washington.
Sounds a bit cold.
Something. Well, oysters are good in the cold, right?
Yeah, there we go. Although it is in the spring and summer.
So last year was the first year for the Mount Washington Shellfish Festival.
Interesting. Okay. Love it. Okay. So oyster farming. How does that work?
Okay, so let's go to the oyster processing. Because this is actually pretty complex and takes a lot of effort and a lot of time for doing this. So, of course, the first part is collecting the larva for the oyster, which is called the spat. And so that's what's going to grow into an oyster. And so when it's released into the ocean... I
have no idea.
When it's released into the ocean, it's not attached to anything. It's sort of just floating around there.
Oh, wow.
And it's microscopic, and it settles onto the mysterious of the floor, so around shells and rocks and other hard surfaces. Now, in a lot of production areas, they'll move that spat into a nursery where they can have a little bit more control of it.
Okay.
Well, they'll have it in tanks or floating trays, mesh bags, just so it can be safe till it can grow. After reaching a certain size in the nursery, the juvenile oyster is transferred to a growing area. And that's when we can go into two styles of growing.
Okay.
They have bottom culture and off-bottom culture. Right, so bottom culture is basically our beach oysters. So basically, you're going to be spreading them out onto an area where they can onto a beach or in the intertidal area, so that they can grow off the bottom, and so they're exposed to more of the natural elements, and they have to deal with the tides and currents, the water temperature. Rain runoff. There's a lot more variabilities, but that's sort of the traditional way of how we would get oysters, right? A little bit more of like off-bottom culture is basically what they're doing is they're suspending the oysters on floats above the ground, and so it can be in trays or in bags as such.
So it's easier to collect.
It's easier to collect, easier to harvest, and you can get them in a much colder water. So that you can and there's less temperature changes. You don't have tidal problems.
Okay.
So
nice.
And that's how you can
that kind of makes sense.
So it's a way that a lot of things. The shells don't get as damaged as much. Yet the shells are a little bit softer on the other hand.
But they seem like really tough rocks. But they can still get damaged at that stage. Are they quite delicate?
Very, very. Yeah, you will notice this if you get into shucking a lot of oysters between bottom oysters and off bottom oysters. Is just the shell. They're a little bit more brittle. I'd say the off bottom.
Yeah, I know they are brittle. Sometimes they can just break open
because they don't have to put as much energy into the shell.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really interesting.
Yeah, and so the maintenance of the oysters is there's lots of work to go along with this, like keeping the beach clean. And of course, oysters are harvested once they reach marketable size. So typically that's 1 to 3 years. So it's a 1 to 3 year investment to get your oysters grown up there.
So they've got every year they do this. So every year they're harvesting ones from 3 years ago.
Yeah, and they're really on a cycle and just they're moving from beach to beach, and when it's ready, they will harvest them and serve and sell them.
And if I'm around Fanny Bay, which is a big place for oysters around here, and I'm just walking along the beach, is there a chance I can find just oysters just there?
Yes. Now you have to be careful because down that area there's a lot of leases, so you don't want to be picking oysters off people's leases and stuff like that.
Leases?
Yeah. So what they will do is they will that section of beach.
For
the production of oysters.
So you're basically stealing if you take it from certain areas. How would you know then if you're there?
There will be signs up there.
Really?
Don't
take the oysters.
Just don't take the
oysters. But if there's does anyone ever, like they're going fishing, just go looking at parts of the beach that are not leased?
I'd imagine so. And there's lots of public beaches down there that aren't leased, so you can access those areas.
Interesting. Okay, that's really. But if it's leased, you can't go on the beach. Period.
You can go on the beach, period.
But you can't nick the oysters.
I wouldn't be. Well, you're stealing someone's business, right?
Yeah.
That's my
interesting.
At least that's my feeling.
You're walking along the beach though, and it's the equivalent of going onto a farmer's wheat field and nicking the wheat. Like,
that's
wow.
a little bit of that.
Let's talk about eating with the.
Let's get into a couple different types of oysters because it's not like there's one style of oyster.
So I thought there was.
Yeah, and so actually for us, it's the Olympia oyster is sort of the traditional oyster is native to the Northwest here, but it was almost wiped out.
Really?
Yeah. They are a smaller size with a distinct round shell with a rich, complex flavor. They're sweet, slightly metallic taste, and that kind of compares to like copper or iron. Anyways, they are our local ones from around here for the Pacific Northwest. They aren't as grown as much, and more of the Pacific oyster, which it was basically known as like a Japanese oyster or a Miyagi oyster. They came over from Japan here on a lot of ships and have been brought over here to specifically grow. They're known for their firm texture, briny, mild, sweet flavor. And most of the top oysters that we sell to the world would be under this classification.
Really? So if you go into a restaurant and order them, all the ones we sell to the world might actually be Japanese style oysters.
Most of them are. Yeah, if you've ever heard of a kushi or even the Fanny Bay oyster, as we've been talking about.
Really? That's fascinating.
Kamutu oyster, which is another Japanese style oyster, which is cultivated in the Northwest. It's known for its small size with a deep cup and a sweet, buttery flavor. As you can see, there's so much different flavors with it. They have a delicate, almost fruity taste with a hint of melon in them. Nice. So that's interesting that you have a lot of these different flavors. They'll have like cucumber flavors in that.
Wow, it's just like wine pairings, isn't it?
It is.
I had no idea.
And then you have like so many producers around, right? Like, and each producer has sort of their own style of oysters, and they have different brands where they've sort of cultivated the oysters to come out in a different appearance. So you have like the Fanny Bay oyster, traditionally owned Vancouver Island. They're like a medium-sized firm texture with a sweet flavor with a hint of cucumber, as I was saying. And they are also served either raw or in the half shell and crepe in cooked dishes. Chef Creek is another one that's really sought after, which is a medium-sized, deep, plump, fresh brining. Effingham oysters, located on the west coast here, and these ones are prized for their small, medium-sized, deep cup and rich flavor and sweetness. Como Guai is another style of oyster that's in the Gulf Islands here on Cortez and Denman Island. We have the Humboldt Sawmill, Golden Mantle, and I'm going to say Bait and Sound oysters, which is like just up from Fanny Bay oysters, is another great local oyster. And there's other I'm just touching on a couple names. Like there's
kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, when you get down there's so many different flavors, and each region has their own flavors.
So one thing that I really loved when I came to Vancouver Island that I didn't see anywhere else, well, I guess there would be somewhere else, but I saw them everywhere here, is oyster burgers. Can I ask, is it just a matter of shucking the oyster and putting them in a batter, and then that's it? That's an oyster burger?
Yeah,
That's the inside.
I mean, that's pretty much what you're going for, is a nice crispy, because you want that little bit of crunch of a
Yeah.
burger that holds it together. And yeah, that's exactly where I would go with for that. So
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think I could do that myself, but
Yeah.
you can do that yourself. Yeah.
So you want to jump into some cooking tips, right?
Yeah, let's do cooking
Let's get
tips.
into
I'm
some
getting
cooking
hungry.
tips. You're getting hungry? Anyways, as you said, you're a master shucker. So let's talk about
I've been cool, boys.
like properly shucking oysters. The first step is you having a very sturdy oyster knife.
Yep.
That's a big trick. And I always find something, you don't want something that flexes, because that can lead into some problems.
God, no.
So something nice and
Yeah.
set. Next up is you want a towel to protect your hand.
Yep.
A lot of times I'll get the oyster shell on a nice cutting board, and then I'll have a nice cloth on top of it. And then I always like to work inserting the knife into the hinge and then just twisting it. I like to do a little bit of wiggle and then a twist just to pop it open. And then I slide the knife along the top of the oyster shell. So usually, you know how an oyster, one side is flat, one side is cupped. It's always a little bit different. Sometimes you get some funny hinges, but usually you have the one flat side. So if you can get that knife in along that top, and then there's just a little bit of a muscle there that you just want to just cut with your knife, and that'll remove the top shell.
Yeah.
Will come right off. And then you want to come back, and you always want to come and with a knife underneath all the meat that's there.
Yeah.
And clip that muscle
And
on the
free
other
it.
side.
Yeah. And if you just go like a monkey, I mean, imagine a monkey shucking an oyster. They just push it in the hole and just force it in there. You're gonna when you open it, it's going to be an absolute mess. It's going to be a bloodbath in there, not literally, but it will be. You would have put the knife directly through the oyster itself. Bits of shell probably will come off, and then you're going to have to pick them out. Otherwise, you're not going to want to eat a bit of shell. It's like 20 times worse than eating a bit of eggshell. So each time you push it in there, there's a different feel to them, and you can only learn this, I think, through repetition. So if you do oyster shucking once, you might think, oh, that's really difficult. But do it again and again and again. It's going to get easier and easier and easier. You just push it in the hole, and you just get a feel for how firm it is. And as you say, just shimmy around a little, loosen it up, and then you can tell when it loosens, and then just pop, make sure it's going along the top, and it'll just clean come off. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I feel like you have to watch about too much pressure. I think because that's where you can lead to problems. A lot of people think they really need to put a ton of pressure on there, and it's use your knife to wiggle in there. Wiggle a little
You're
bit.
making it come loose.
Yeah.
It's not to say there's no pressure. Initially, you do need to have some pressure. It's having good control and having that wiggle. And as you say, when you've taken the lid off, and it's then about freeing the oyster and either taking out the shell or leaving it in the shell, ready to be shut, ready to be eaten.
And then that brings us to the next thing is raw consumption. Because you can eat raw oysters.
Oh, God, yeah.
And they're beautiful. Now, there is a disclaimer that any restaurant that is serving oysters, that oysters do contain some bacteria and to be careful. And that can lead to foodborne illness.
And, if it's if the weather's too hot and it's unusually hot, like say it was here and it was like 38 degrees in July for 4 weeks in a row, then if you're getting local oysters, you've got to question the risk there, because the waters, those shallow waters of Fanny Bay, are going to have warmed up, and that's not ideal for an oyster. This time of year, perfect. You're quid in.
The other thing to look for is if they get milky. Because once they start heating up, they get milky.
Oh, okay.
And you can notice that in the brine, that they'll have that little bit of cloudiness into it. And it's pretty easy to figure out and see it out there. But that's one thing. Anyways, let's get on to some raw oysters, because there's nothing more beautiful than starting off, and what an aphrodisiac, than having a couple raw oysters. The best way is on a bed of crushed ice.
Yep.
I've done in the restaurant, we actually do frozen rocks that we've washed. Frozen rocks, just because you want to get that
beach
nice
filling,
ice cool, and it doesn't melt, so it's nice. And then with a nice wedge of lemon, or as I've got here, mignonette sauce. I'll do a recipe real quick here.
You gotta love the mignonette.
Cocktail sauce, or of course, let's try out some hot sauces, making sure they're nice and cool, and just taking them right down. And a mignonette sauce is such a flavorful taste to have with it. It brings out that sweet and slightly tangy flavors to everything. And a super easy recipe. You can do a whole batch of here. So say like a half cup of red wine vinegar. I would almost say go out get a better quality red wine vinegar, because you're just going to notice that flavor so much. You can do like 2 tablespoons of really finely minced shallots. So you've got that little bit of garlicky onion flavor to there. And then we'll do a little bit, 1 teaspoon of like fresh cracked pepper. And when I'm talking cracked pepper, I mean not taking your grinder out there, but like take your pepper out, take the frying pan and smash it with the bottom of the pan, and you'll just get this beautiful crack, and it'll have that really hot. Now, some people put a little sugar in there because I like to sweeten it up. I always say if you have a really good vinegar, you're not going to need any of that. And then a pinch of salt just to taste, just to bring it up. And basically, you just whisk that together, let it sit for half an hour, and serve it. And it's something you can keep up for a week or so. But I mean, let's get real. You want to eat this with your oysters as soon as possible. So. Yeah. And if you still have Mignonette, then you can go get some more oysters, right?
All right, cooking.
Let's get on to grilling. Grilling is a great way to cook off oysters. It has that smoky, charred aroma. Just washing the oysters really well, putting them direct on the grill. This is better for like a larger size oyster. Yeah, throwing them straight on the grill, preheated grill, and then just cooking them until the edges start to curl and slightly the oyster is heated through. And then just squeezing some, as I said, some compound butter would be beautiful. Fresh lemon, garlic butter. You got them all.
Nice.
Steaming oysters is a nice, really quick, easy method of getting at the oysters, and super easy to shuck. So just throwing them in a little steamer tray, nice boiling water with a steamer tray, put the lid on them, wait till they just pop, and then you can just pull them out there.
Gorge.
And that's a great way too if you're going to be doing some frying yourself too. But yeah, splash of some melted butter or some white wine on there is great. Frying, let's go for your oyster burger. Dredging them in a little flour, egg, and then coating them in breadcrumbs or cornmeal. I've done taco chips, and any kind of crunchy thing is just a fun way. And then it's like, frying them in hot oil until they're golden brown and crispy. And that
you can just fry them without batter or anything like that. Just chuck them in.
Well, I would do the flour egg wash. And
right.
You want to have a nice crush to them. Even I find dredging them before you sear them just holds them a little bit firmer together.
Nice.
And gives you a nice flavor. And then that's where you get like some nice tartar sauce or a sharp aioli or, all those just go really well. Let's get into baking. Baked oysters, one of my favorite, and this is where I'm getting into doing a nice something on top of them. So mixing up some bacon, some herbs, some cheese on top of there, taking your shucked oyster, throwing it in the oven. And
what kind of cheese would you put on there?
I like doing like a nice sharp cheese. Feta cheese has worked really nice for me in the past.
A little bit nice and salty.
Yeah, a little bit of salty. Yeah, like Parmesan cheese is a really nice one. Of course, poaching oysters is a great way. And actually, I used to poach my oysters in their own liquid, so it would drain off.
Right.
If you buy shucked oysters, like pre-shucked oysters, using the brine and then poaching my oysters in that liquid and then freezing them. And then if I wanted to make an oyster burger, I would pull them out, bread them, and fry them, right?
From frozen?
Yeah, because they're already cooked through. And then as you sear them, you get that nice crust. So they just heat all the way through.
If you want an oyster burger, can you just get it? You don't have to go and buy and shuck and all that.
Yes.
Can you just buy them canned?
Yeah. I would not recommend them for raw oysters, the pre-shucked ones, but they're great for any cooked oyster.
Right.
If you're going to add them into, let's say, like a stew, if you wanted to make like an oyster chowder.
Yeah.
I've even made oyster ice cream.
Now that I'm imagining that was Blue Spruce.
That was Blue Spruce, and I actually did it I did it at the Shellfish Festival that was at the Philberg, and it was a hit. It was, some people didn't like it because it had
you surprised me, John.
Yeah, well, it had a bit of a briny flavor, but I had this young kid who he looked at me and he's like, I don't think so. And so I gave him a little cup of it, and he must have eaten about 7 other little cups because I was just selling it as a sampler or it's just giving it away as a sampler as a sort of fundraiser for the North Vancouver Island Chefs Association. So I put a jar up there and people were throwing change in for it. So
now, when you said we're going to go through some recipes, I thought, okay, frying's going to be in there and maybe grilling. Ice cream is not one of them.
And I'll
I mean,
admit,
wow.
with the ice cream is I took the oysters and you cook them into brine. And so you actually don't serve the oysters themselves directly in the ice cream. It's just in the brine. And then you pull the oysters out and use them for another.
Still
another
sounds
thing.
absolutely
Yeah.
rank, John, to be honest.
Do you want to get into a little bit of buying and storing oysters?
How do we buy them? I mean, in my mind, I'm in Thrifties. They seem pretty good with shellfish.
Let's talk about buying from a reputable
Yeah,
source.
yeah.
So let's go to grocery stores. Fishmongers are great. We have a few around here. I always used to get mine from the Fanny Bay Seafood Shop down in Buckley Bay, which is a bit of a drive.
What is the best fishmongers in the Comox Valley that's local, that's not miles out of town?
Well, I mean, as I got oysters today, it was at the Old Farm Market.
Oh, are they good for that? Are they?
Yeah, they actually Fanny Bay Oysters has put their store in there.
Great.
So they have some beautiful oysters, and they're fresh from the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple oyster plants up and down the island here, like we're talking about Bait and Sound, Fanny Bay Oysters.
Yeah.
You can hit up all those places, and they will have some. Yeah, we've had a couple fishmongers close down in the last few years, so a lot of the grocery stores seem to be the places to go. So Quality Foods, Thrifties.
Especially Quality Foods. It's an island, so you'd think they'd be good at that. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got that. Always check for freshness. I mean, it doesn't take much. Make sure your shells are always tightly closed or a slight glap, and when you tap them, they come together. And that's with all shellfish.
Yep.
Shellfish.
You talk about mussels.
What's that?
You talk about, is that mussels?
We're talking about oysters here, but like oysters, clams, mussels, all fall under the same sort of thing. Yeah, if they're open to big gap, you don't want them.
And when you get served them, if they're closed, you don't eat them. When you get served,
Yeah.
mussels,
If you served a mussel or clam that's not open, definitely don't.
yeah. And for a restaurant, is it acceptable if one or two of them are closed? If you order a portion of mussels and one or two of them are closed, or should they have really caught that?
They probably should have caught that. Yeah, I know sometimes you slip through because you have a dozen in the pan and you're rushing a bit. It happens to the best of us. I mean, part of the thing in a restaurant is they have to actually track where all their oysters come. They have to keep the tags from the bags when they get their oysters. So if there is an issue, they can track it back. It's actually really well patrolled and checked into. Okay, so that would be one thing, is just like making sure it smells fresh. If it has a foul smell, discard it right away. It's not worth it. And when you transport oysters, pack them in ice. Keep them as cold as possible. I always keep my oysters on ice in the fridge. Nice. It's just a good, safe way. They're cool. That's how they like to be.
Yeah.
They're not going to go off very quick. Yeah. And then, you want to make sure they are in the refrigerator below 4 degrees, right? And above freezing, of course. Yeah. You can keep them in the bag or you can put them into a container. But the one thing is, you don't want to saran wrap them. You don't want to seal them off. You want them to be able to breathe.
Yeah. Okay.
They are living animals, so they do actually do that. And of course, always, handle them with care. Avoid dropping them or damaging the shells. If the shell is damaged, that's not good for you. And then you possibly want to use oysters as soon as you get them. It's just best practice.
Yeah. Don't let them sit around the fridge for a week.
Don't buy them a week ahead and then get ready. Just wait till the day. Try and get them like 1 or 2 days ahead of time, and I think you'll have no problems, and you'll just have a great time.
Great. Anything else with storing and buying?
I think people should be able to get a pretty good sense of that and be able to really enjoy them.
So in terms of if someone wants to get involved with this in the area, so we've got the BC Shellfish, Seafood and Shellfish Festival, is that what it's called?
The BC Seafood Festival.
Seafood Festival.
Yeah.
That's Mount Washington.
Yes.
When does that take place?
I have to check on the dates there.
Is it spring or summer? Summer, isn't it?
It's always in June.
June. Okay.
It's usually
late
around
spring.
the June area. It's one of those ones I always laugh at because it's probably the worst time of year because the water's just warming up, and a lot of times the oysters go into a spawn, and so you do not eat oysters when they're in a spawn.
Wow. Okay.
That's one thing. So I get a real good.
But it's convenient for us.
It is the time when people can get out. The one thing also I was going to talk about is just pairing.
Oh, yeah.
Oysters with beverages.
I missed that. Yeah, what would you pair it with?
Well, I mean, here we got a couple of things. Like we got champagne or sparkling wine is always a perfect fit with oysters. And just due to its high acidity, crispness, and clean flavors, the bubbles help palate with the oyster, while the acidity cuts through the richness of the shellfish.
Yeah.
Same with like a white wine, a nice crisp white wine I would definitely recommend. There's so many different crisp white wines that you can go with. Rosé is another good one. But you
nice.
want something that's, a bright acidity, maybe some really nice fruit flavor would really pair really well. Something with a strawberry, watermelon, or a citrus note. Dry sherry is another one I've been told.
Oh, wow.
It's not really been my thing. And the other thing is doing is beer.
Okay. What
Right?
kind of one do we do there?
Well, you've got different levels of bitterness that you can try with this. So like something with a crisp, moderate level bitterness, something light body, a hoppy beer such as a Pilsner, a lager, a Saison, which is another great beer that would pair really well. I've also done, doing clear spirits. So a vodka or a gin would be actually really nice to go with an oyster.
Gin and oysters party. Imagine
Let's
that.
do it, eh? And it helps cut through some of the richness. And then for a non-alcoholic way, as in we were saying, the bubbles in champagne work. So like a nice mineral water would pair really nice, or a soda.
Yeah.
Just to cut through some of that richness of the
Beautiful.
and clean the palate as you're enjoying it.
Wow.
I think we've done
gorgeous.
a good job talking about oysters here.
I've learned a lot. I mean, the only thing I really know is how to shuck an oyster, and I've eaten a fair few raw. I love how versatile oysters can be, and I think we've helped take some of the mystery away from it, and it can be seen as just an ingredient that you can use, or a centerpiece even. Relatively easy. There's lots of ways to cook it, to eat it, to prepare it, and it is a natural bounty. I mean, it has been used by First Nations in this area for thousands of years. Let's just continue that tradition. How wonderful.
I love it.
All right, John, do we want people to get in touch?
Let's get in touch.
Yeah.
We got some fun stuff coming up. I mean, we got a couple episodes on the go here that are be coming up over the next couple weeks. And I'm going to, little heads up that I've got a tailgate party episode coming up. Because I'm going to be heading down to Super Bowl really quick.
I was going to say, now you're going down to a city with our southern neighbours that are renowned for high quality culture and cuisine. Where are you going to, John?
I am going to Las Vegas to watch the Super Bowl.
Oh, you're going to be eating some traditional desert food.
Well, our goal is to see if we can find some Fanny Bay oysters down there and add it to the list, because I know
buffet.
I know they're renowned down there, and they're served there all the time. So I'm super excited about this, and I'm kind of interested in seeing what the parties are like, and it's not the parties, but the food, the cuisine. I think it's just going to be a fun trip. Full disclosure, this is my wife taking me down as her assistant, as she's going to report on it. So
Trouble.
If you want to learn about some football, some NFL football, check out her Off the Record podcast. So
oh yeah, it's definitely worth listening to. And can we get Erin actually onto this maybe on the next one?
Maybe
do a bit of a debrief.
Well, because she probably pays a lot more attention than I do, where I'm just like gobsmacked looking at food, going. All
right, I'm going to set you a task now, and I've not planned this. Is on the fly. All right, I want you guys to discover 3 new cuisines when you're in Las Vegas. Now, it can be a different type of potato fry. It can be anything. All right, it doesn't have to be a new animal or something.
I'm on it.
But I want you, and then are you going to come on, and you need to find something good. And it can't be, oh, this is awful. Like, it needs to be good. And you come on, we'll do a debrief for the tailgate party. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Absolutely love it.
And then we got some other exciting news coming down the pipe too, so you'll have to stay tuned, because
I'm really excited about this.
We got an 8-episode series hopefully coming up pretty quick that I think will catch people off guard a little bit. So if you are out there and you want to talk to us, if you're a farmer, a chef, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're just someone who loves food, we'd love to hear from you even more about what you would like to know about our Edible Valley.
Get in touch. All right. Great. Well, safe flight, John.
I think you will.
Take care, and we will see you for another episode of the Edible Valley podcast.
Cheers.
And that wraps up another episode of the Edible Valley podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and a special thanks goes to the local businesses that help support our podcast. They make it possible for us to showcase your local food community. We'd love you to follow us on your preferred social media at Edible Valley, where you can check out our blog, find recipes and tips, behind the scenes, and of course keep a lookout for where we are going to turn up next in your Edible Valley.
It's got to be talk. we actually, is it recording?
It's, I just push record.
We talk more before the podcast than we do on the actual podcast.
I know, that's just what happened.
What are some of the things we've discussed? Technology.
We should probably record it.
The Before the Podcast podcast.
And this has been an Edible Valley production.
Yeah. Beep, 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 beep. Okay. Ready again?